The great hall of Nexus Prime floated in the cold emptiness between stars. It was a station built by hands that were not hands, minds that thought in ways no human could understand. For 10,000 years, this place had served as the meeting ground for the Galactic Conclave, a gathering of 217 spacefaring species who had long ago decided that the universe needed order. High Arbiter HFY stood at the center of the chamber. His body was made of pure energy, held together by a shell of living crystal that pulsed with soft blue light. He had held this position for 300 years, and in that time, he had overseen the judgment of 47 developing species. Some had been welcomed into the galactic community. Others had been deemed too dangerous to exist. Today, he would announce the fate of species number 40-8. The representatives filled the curved seats that rose in endless tiers around him. There were beings of light and shadow, creatures of silicon and metal, entities that existed partially in dimensions humans could not perceive. They had traveled from every corner of the galaxy to hear this verdict. Though most already knew what it would be, HFY raised one crystalline arm, and silence fell across the assembly. The species designated human, originating from the third planet of the Sol system, has been under observation for 112 standard years, he began. His voice did not travel through air, but directly into the minds of every being present. In that time, we have intercepted and analyzed their electromagnetic communications. We have studied their history, their behavior, their potential trajectories. He paused, and the silence grew heavy. The evidence is conclusive. Humans are a predatory species with an extraordinary capacity for violence. In the brief span of their recorded history, they have engaged in over 15,000 armed conflicts. They have developed weapons capable of destroying their own world. They have committed acts of cruelty against their own kind that rival the worst atrocities in galactic records. Murmurs rippled through the assembly. Ambassador Threx of the militant hegemony clicked his mandibles in approval. His species had argued for immediate action against Earth decades ago. Furthermore, HFY continued, predictive models indicate a 93% probability that humans will achieve interstellar travel within the next 2 centuries. If allowed to spread beyond their home system, they pose a significant threat to galactic stability. He let the weight of his words settle before speaking the sentence that had been decided long before. This assembly gathered. The judgment of the conclave is termination. The cleansing fleet will be dispatched immediately. Execution will occur in 47 standard rotations. There was no applause, no celebration. The conclave did not take pleasure in such decisions. This was simply the price of order, the cost of keeping the galaxy safe from species that could not control their own nature. 12,000 light-years away, Lisa Grant had no idea that her species had just been sentenced to death. She sat in the command center of the United Nations Deep Space Monitoring Station, a facility buried deep in the mountains of Colorado. The station had been built in secret 20 years ago, funded by a coalition of nations who had finally accepted that the universe might not be empty. Its purpose was simple: listen to the stars and hope that someone would answer. So far, the stars had been silent. Lisa was 43 years old, with gray streaking through her dark hair and lines around her eyes that spoke of too many sleepless nights. She had dedicated her entire adult life to this work, and sometimes she wondered if it had all been a waste. The universe seemed vast and empty, indifferent to the small blue world spinning in its unremarkable corner of the galaxy. Danny Marsh sat at the communications console across the room. He was young, barely 30, with the kind of enthusiasm that Lisa had lost somewhere along the way. He had joined the station 2 years ago, and his energy had been both refreshing and exhausting. "Commander," he said suddenly, his voice carrying a strange note that made Lisa look up from her coffee. I'm picking up something weird. Define weird, Lisa replied, walking over to his station. Danny pointed at his screen, where a series of waveforms danced in patterns she had never seen before. This signal is not random noise. It's not any natural phenomenon I can identify. And it's definitely not from any of our satellites or stations. Lisa felt her heart begin to beat faster. In 20 years of listening, they had found nothing. No signals, no messages, no evidence that anyone else was out there. And now, on an ordinary Tuesday night, Danny was telling her that something had changed. Where is it coming from? She asked. Danny's fingers flew across his keyboard. That's the thing. I can't pinpoint an exact source. It's like it's coming from everywhere at once. Or maybe from somewhere so far away that our equipment can't triangulate it. Lisa leaned closer to the screen, studying the waveforms. They were too regular to be natural, too complex to be accidental. This was structured. This was intentional. This was someone talking. Start recording everything, she ordered. And get Dr. Patterson up here. We need to start working on translation protocols. The next 6 hours were a blur of activity. More staff were called in. Secure lines were established to partner facilities around the world. The signal was analyzed, broken down, studied from every possible angle. It was Danny who finally cracked it. The message was not encoded in any human language, but in mathematics, the one language that any intelligent species would share. Prime numbers, geometric sequences, fundamental constants. The aliens had built their message on a foundation of universal truths. When the translation was complete, Danny read it aloud in a voice that trembled slightly. Species designation: human, origin, soul-free, judgment, termination. Execution timeline: 47 standard rotations. The room fell silent. Lisa stared at the screen, trying to process what she was hearing. Somewhere out in the vast darkness of space, someone had looked at humanity and decided that they did not deserve to exist. And they had given them 47 days to prepare for the end. This has to be a mistake, someone whispered. Or a hoax. This can't be real. But Lisa knew it was real. She had spent her entire life waiting for a message from the stars, and now one had finally come. It was not a greeting or an invitation. It was a death sentence. She picked up the secure phone that connected directly to the wrist to the face of the Secretary General of the United Nations. Her hand was steady, even though her world was falling apart. Sir, she said when the line connected, we have a situation. Humanity has 47 days to live. Outside the mountain facility, the stars shone down on a world that did not yet know its fate. In cities and villages, in homes and hospitals, in schools and factories, 7 billion humans went about their lives, unaware that the universe had looked at them and found them wanting. The countdown had begun. The world learned of its death sentence 3 days after Lisa Grant received the message. There had been arguments about whether to tell people at all. Some leaders wanted to keep it secret, fearing riots and chaos. Others believed that humanity deserved to know the truth. In the end, the truth could not be contained. Too many people had seen the message. Too many agencies had been involved in verifying it. When the news finally broke, it spread across the planet like wildfire. The reaction was everything the leaders had feared and more. Stock markets crashed within hours. Governments declared states of emergency. Churches filled with people seeking comfort, while others took to the streets in anger and despair. Some refused to believe it was real. Others accepted it too quickly, falling into hopelessness. Lisa watched the chaos unfold from her command center in Colorado. She had not slept in 3 days, and her body ached with exhaustion. But she could not rest. Somewhere out there, beings with the power to destroy her entire species were preparing to do exactly that. and she had no idea how to stop them. The emergency session of the United Nations was held on the fifth day. Representatives from every nation gathered in New York, their faces drawn with fear and confusion. Military leaders presented plans for defense, but everyone knew it was pointless. A civilization capable of sending messages across thousands of light years would have weapons beyond human imagination. Fighting back was not an option. It was during this session that Peter Cole stood up to speak. Peter was not a politician or a general. He was a radio astronomer from a small university in Ohio, someone who had spent his career studying signals from distant stars. He had been invited to the session as a technical advisor, expected to explain the science behind the alien message. Instead, he offered something else entirely. "They heard our worst," he said, his voice quiet but steady in the vast chamber. "For 100 years, our radio and television signals have been leaking into space." And what did those signals contain? News of wars, images of violence, the sounds of bombs and screams and hatred. If that was all I knew about a species, I might want to destroy them too. The room was silent. Peter continued, "But that's not all we are. We are also the species that creates symphonies and builds cathedrals. We are the species that runs into burning buildings to save strangers. We are the species that plants trees we will never see grow tall. They judged us by our worst moments. What if we showed them our best?" The proposal seemed absurd at first. Send a message? Make a case for humanity's survival? But as the hours passed and no better ideas emerged, people began to take it seriously. What did they have to lose? Lisa Grant was placed in charge of the project. She had received a death sentence. Now she would try to appeal it. The work began immediately. Teams were assembled in every country, tasked with gathering the best of humanity. Not propaganda, not lies, but truth. The full truth of what humans were capable of, both good and bad. Danny Marsh handled the technical challenges. The original alien message had been sent using technology far beyond human capability, but they could still boost their own signal to reach the coordinates from which the message had come. It would take days for the transmission to arrive, but it would arrive. Lisa spent those days watching the footage that poured in from around the world. She saw recordings of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. A man in Japan who had spent 60 years planting a forest by hand. A woman in Brazil who had opened her home to hundreds of orphan children. Firefighters in Australia walking into walls of flame to save animals. Doctors working without rest during epidemics. Strangers forming human chains to rescue people from floods. She saw music and art from every culture. Paintings that captured the beauty of the human experience. Songs that spoke of love and loss and hope. The laughter of children playing in schoolyards. The quiet joy of elderly couples holding hands. She also saw the darkness. The project did not hide humanity's failures. There were images of war and cruelty, of hatred and destruction. But alongside each horror, there were stories of those who had fought against it. Resistance fighters who had risked everything to oppose tyranny. Ordinary citizens who had sheltered strangers from persecution. Survivors who had chosen forgiveness over revenge. The message was assembled piece by piece, a portrait of a species in all its complexity. Peter Cole helped write the introduction, translating it into the same mathematical language the aliens had used. "We know you are listening. We know what you have seen of us. Before you end us, please listen to who we really are. Not just our failures, but our hopes. Not just our cruelty, but our kindness. Not just what we have been, but what we are trying to become." On the 30th day, the transmission was ready. Lisa stood in the command center, surrounded by her team and a small group of world leaders who had come to witness this moment. The room was quiet, heavy with the weight of what they were about to do. Is this really going to work? Someone asked. Lisa did not answer. She did not know. All she knew was that this was their only chance. Danny looked up from his console. "Signal is ready, Commander. Just give the word." Lisa thought of her daughter, who was 7 years old and did not understand why her mother had been gone so long. She thought of the billions of people around the world who were counting on this moment. She thought of all the humans who had ever lived and died, their stories and struggles and dreams. "Send it," she said. The signal burst forth from the antenna array, carrying the hopes of an entire species into the darkness of space. It would travel for days before reaching its destination, a tiny whisper in the vast silence of the universe. In the command center, there was nothing left to do but wait. Lisa finally went home that night. She held her daughter close and watched the stars through the window of their small house. Somewhere out there, beings she would never meet were preparing to decide the fate of everything she loved. She had done all she could. Now, the universe would answer. The days that followed were the longest of her life. The world held its breath, waiting for a response that might never come. Some people prayed. Some people raged. Some tried to live their final days as normally as possible, finding comfort in routine. 17 days remained when Danny called her back to the command center. "Commander," he said, and there was something in his voice that made her heart stop. "We're getting something." Lisa ran to his station, her eyes fixed on the screen where new data was appearing. After 30 days of silence, the universe was speaking again, and this time, it had heard them. The human transmission arrived at Nexus Prime while the cleansing fleet was making its final preparations. 7,000 warships from 12 different species hung in formation at the edge of the Sol system, their weapons charged and ready. In 3 more days, they would cross the boundary and reduce Earth to dust and memory. High Arbiter Kethvar received word of the transmission in his private chambers. Under Conclave law, any direct communication from a condemned species had to be reviewed before execution could proceed. It was an old rule, created in an age when the Conclave still believed in mercy. Most such messages were desperate pleas or threats, easily dismissed. This one was different. Kethvar began watching alone, his crystalline form pulsing with soft light as the human broadcast played before him. It opened with music, a symphony that rose and fell in patterns that spoke of both sorrow and triumph. The mathematics were crude by galactic standards, but there was something in the sound that made him pause. Then came the images. Humans helping other humans, pulling survivors from collapsed buildings, sharing food with strangers, carrying the wounded to safety. He saw humans building homes for those who had lost everything, planting gardens in the ruins of war, teaching children to read in makeshift schools. The transmission did not hide humanity's darkness. There were images of war and cruelty that confirmed everything the Conclave had feared. But alongside each horror, the humans showed something else. People who had stood against the darkness. Ordinary beings who had risked everything to protect strangers. Movements that had transformed societies from within, turning enemies into neighbors. Kethvar watched a human male spend 40 years planting a forest by himself, one tree at a time. He watched a human female open her home to 100 children who had no one else. He watched communities choose forgiveness after devastating violence, breaking cycles of revenge that had lasted generations. The transmission ended with an image of Earth itself, spinning slowly in the black void of space. Blue oceans and green continents, white clouds and glittering cities. A small world, fragile and alone, home to beings who were capable of both terrible destruction and extraordinary beauty. The final message was simple. We know what we have been. We are trying to become something better. Please give us the chance to prove it. Kethvar sat in silence for a long time after the transmission ended. Then he called an emergency session of the Conclave. The great hall filled quickly. Representatives, who had already celebrated the coming cleansing, now gathered with confusion and annoyance. Ambassador Thrax of the militant hegemony was the first to speak. "Why have we been summoned? The judgment has been rendered. The fleet is ready. What more is there to discuss?" Keffer raised one crystalline arm, and the human transmission began to play on the massive display at the center of the chamber. 217 species watched in silence as the story of humanity unfolded before them. When it ended, the chamber erupted. "This changes nothing," Thrax declared, his mandibles clicking with agitation. "They are predators. Their history proves it. A few stories of kindness do not erase 10,000 years of war. But it complicates the judgment," Delegate Ymira of the Wisdom Collective replied. Her form was made of pure light, shifting through colors that reflected her emotional state. Right now, she burned with soft gold, the color of uncertainty. Our predictive models were based on incomplete data. We saw their capacity for violence, but we did not account for their capacity for change. Change. Thrax laughed, a harsh clicking sound. "They have been killing each other since they first learned to hold weapons. That is not a species capable of change." "And yet they have changed," Ymira countered. "Look at their history. In mere centuries, they went from accepting slavery to condemning it, from burning those they called different to protecting them, from endless tribal warfare to attempting global cooperation. No species in our records has shown such rapid moral evolution." The debate spread through the chamber like fire. Factions formed and dissolved. Species that had not spoken to each other in millennia found themselves on the same side. Ancient grudges were forgotten as new arguments emerged. Elder Morven of the Eternal Archive spoke for the first time in decades. His species had been recording galactic history since before most civilizations had achieved fire. "I have reviewed our records," he said, his voice like wind through dead leaves. "In 12 million years, we have terminated 423 developing species. Of those, 87 showed signs of potential similar to what we see in humans. We destroyed them anyway." The chamber fell silent. "We will never know what those species might have become," Morven continued. "We will never know if our fear was justified, or if we extinguished lights that could have illuminated the galaxy. The humans have shown us something we have not seen in a very long time. They have shown us hope." Thrax rose again, his carapace gleaming under the chamber lights. "Hope is not safety. Hope is not security. Our duty is to protect the galaxy from threats, not to gamble on the potential of violent primitives." "And when did protection become preemption?" Ymira asked. "When did guidance become extinction? We were not always executioners. There was a time when the Conclave helped young species grow, taught them to overcome their worst impulses, gave them the tools to become better than they were. That was before the devastation," Thrax replied coldly. "Before we learned what happens when dangerous species are allowed to spread unchecked. The devastation. Even now, 10,000 years later, the word carried weight. A species called the Kreth had been given a chance to prove themselves. They had seemed promising, creative, full of potential. The Conclave had welcomed them. Within 3 centuries, the Kreth had launched a war that destroyed 200 inhabited worlds and nearly shattered the galactic order. "The humans are not the Kreth," Ymira said softly. "How do you know?" Thrax demanded. "How can you possibly know what they will become?" "I don't," Ymira admitted. "But I know what we have become. I know that we have grown so afraid of danger that we have forgotten how to see potential." The humans looked at themselves honestly in that transmission. Perhaps it is time we did the same. The debate continued for days. Keffer listened to every argument, weighed every perspective. The fleet remained at the edge of the Sol system, waiting for orders that did not come. In his private chambers, The High Arbiter watched the human transmission again and again. He saw the forest they had planted and the children they had saved. He saw their wars and their weapons. He saw a species caught between what they were and what they could be. Finally, he made his decision. He returned to the great chamber, where the exhausted representatives had gathered for what they knew would be the final verdict. The fleet was running out of time. The decision had to be made now. Kethver raised his crystalline arm, and silence fell. "The judgment of the conclave is suspended," he announced. "Earth will live. For now." The chamber exploded into chaos, but Kethver was already composing the message that would be sent to the small blue world waiting 12,000 light years away. Humanity would have its chance. 17 days remained when the response finally came. Lisa Grant had not left the command center in over a week. She slept on a cot in the corner of the room, ate whatever food her team brought her, and spent every waking moment staring at screens that showed nothing but silence. Around the world, people had begun to lose hope. Some had stopped waiting for a miracle and started preparing for the end. Danny Marsh was the first to notice the change. He had been monitoring the same frequencies for so long that his eyes had begun to blur, but something in the pattern made him sit up straight. "Commander," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "we're getting something." Lisa was at his side in seconds. The data on his screen was different from anything they had seen before. Where the first alien message had been brief and cold, this one was complex, layered with information that their systems struggled to process. "Can you translate it?" Lisa asked. Danny's fingers flew across his keyboard. The mathematical patterns were the same as before, but the structure was different. It took hours to decode, hours during which the world held its breath and waited when the translation was finally complete. Danny read it aloud to a room full of exhausted, desperate people. "We have heard you. Your words do not erase your nature, but they reveal something we had forgotten. That nature can be transcended. That the species you are is not the species you must remain." Lisa felt tears forming in her eyes, but she did not let them fall. "Not yet." Danny continued reading. "The judgment of termination is suspended, not revoked. Your species will be watched, guided, when you're ready to accept guidance. But you will be given the chance to become what your transmission promised you could be." The room was silent. No one dared to speak, as if words might shatter this fragile hope. "You showed us your worst," Danny read, his own voice cracking now. "Then you showed us your best. Now show us your future. The galaxy will be watching." And then came the image that would be burned into human memory forever. A fleet of ships, thousands of them, hanging in the darkness at the edge of their solar system. The weapons that had been prepared to end everything. And then, slowly, impossibly, the fleet began to turn away. Lisa finally let the tears fall. The news spread across Earth faster than any message in human history. In New York and Tokyo, in Lagos and London, in villages and cities on every continent, people stopped what they were doing and looked up at the sky. They were alive. They were going to stay alive. The celebrations lasted for days. Strangers embraced in the streets. Old enemies shook hands. For one brief, shining moment, humanity was united in a way it had never been before. But Lisa knew that this was not simply an ending. It was a beginning, and beginnings were always the hardest part. The weeks that followed brought new challenges. The galaxy had given humanity a chance, but that chance came with conditions. They were being watched. Everything they did, every decision they made, would be judged by beings they could not see and barely understood. Some people resented this. They argued that humanity should be free to chart its own course without alien oversight. Protests erupted in some cities, demanding that Earth reject the conclave's terms and declare independence. But most people understood the truth. They had been given a gift, and that gift came with responsibility. The transmission had promised that humanity was trying to become better. Now they had to prove it. Changes began slowly, then accelerated. Wars that had seemed endless suddenly found paths to peace. Resources that had been hoarded were shared. Environmental destruction that had been ignored was finally addressed. It was not perfect. Humanity did not suddenly become angels, but they became more conscious of their choices, more aware that the universe was watching. Peter Cole became one of the most famous people on Earth. The radio astronomer who had suggested the transmission found himself invited to speak at universities and parliaments around the world. He always said the same thing. They had not been saved because they were good. They had been saved because they had shown the potential to become good. Now they had to live up to that potential. Lisa Grant remained at the monitoring station in Colorado. There was still work to do. The conclave had promised guidance when humanity was ready, and someone had to be listening when that guidance arrived. Danny Marsh stayed with her. He had declined offers to work at more prestigious facilities, preferring the quiet mountain station where everything had begun. "Someone has to keep watching the stars," he said with a shrug. 6 months after the message that saved humanity, a new signal arrived. It was not a judgment or a warning. It was an invitation. The conclave had designated Earth as a protected developing world. In time, they would send representatives to make contact. In time, humanity would be offered the chance to join the galactic community. But first, they had to prove themselves worthy. Lisa read the new message to a small gathering of world leaders who had come to Colorado for this moment. The conditions were clear. Humanity had to demonstrate sustained progress toward peace, environmental restoration, and social justice. They had to show that their transmission had not been a lie. "How long do we have?" one of the leaders asked. Lisa checked the translation again. They didn't specify. They said they would know when we were ready. It was not the answer anyone wanted, but perhaps it was the answer they needed. There would be no deadline, no countdown this time. Just the endless work of becoming better, day by day, generation by generation. Outside the mountain facility, the sun was setting over the peaks. Lisa stepped out into the cool evening air and looked up at the sky, where the first stars were beginning to appear. Somewhere out there, beings she would never meet were watching. They had seen humanity at its worst and chosen to believe in its best. They had gambled on a species that was violent and cruel, but also brave and kind. Lisa thought about her daughter, who was learning to read now and asked endless questions about the stars. She thought about all the children who would grow up in a world that knew it was not alone, that knew it was being watched, that knew it had something to prove. The galaxy had targeted Earth for destruction. One human transmission had changed everything. But the real work was just beginning. Lisa smiled and went back inside. There were messages to monitor, signals to track, a future to build. The stars would be watching. 5 years had passed since the day humanity learned it was not alone in the universe. 5 years since a message from the stars had sent them to death. 5 years since a desperate transmission had earned them a second chance. Lisa Grant stood in the main hangar of the Kennedy Space Center, watching as the first human delegation prepared to leave the solar system. The ship that would carry them was not of human design. It was a gift from the conclave, an elegant vessel of silver and light that moved through space in ways human. Scientists were still struggling to understand. The delegation was small. Just 12 people chosen to represent all of humanity. Scientists and artists, philosophers and engineers, young and old. From every corner of the Earth, they would travel to Nexus Prime, the great station where the conclave gathered, and take the first steps toward joining the galactic community. Peter Cole was among them. The radio astronomer had spent the last 5 years becoming something more, a voice for humanity's potential, a reminder of what they had promised to become. His hair was gray now, and lines had deepened around his eyes, but his voice was still steady when he spoke of hope. Danny Marsh had declined the invitation to join the delegation. He preferred to stay on Earth, at the monitoring station where everything had begun. "Someone has to keep listening," he had said with his familiar shrug. Lisa understood. She had made the same choice, but today she was here to see them off. To watch as humanity took its first true step into a universe that was vast and ancient and full of wonders they could barely imagine. The escort ship had arrived 3 days earlier, piloted by beings that most humans had only seen in transmissions. Delegate Ymira of the Wisdom Collective had come herself, a luminous form shifting through colors that Lisa had learned to read over years of communication. She was nervous, Lisa realized. Even beings of pure energy could feel the weight of historic moments. "You understand that your probation continues," Ymira said, as she greeted the delegation at the hangar entrance. "Many in the Conclave still believe we made an error in sparing your world. They will be watching for any sign that their fears were justified." Peter nodded. He had heard this warning many times over the past 5 years. "And what do you believe?" he asked. Ymira paused, her light dimming slightly as she considered the question. "I believe the galaxy has grown old and afraid. We have been stewards of the stars for millions of years, and somewhere along the way, we forgot why we sought the stars in the first place. Your transmission reminded us." She gestured toward the viewport, where Earth hung blue and fragile against the infinite black of space. "You are chaotic," she continued. "Violent, unpredictable. Your history is filled with horrors that made many in the Conclave certain you could never change. But you are also brave in ways we have forgotten how to be. You love fiercely. You hope stubbornly. You refuse to accept that your flaws define you." Lisa smiled slightly. "Is that a compliment?" "It is an observation," Ymira replied. "And perhaps a confession. We feared you because you reminded us of what we once were. Young, ambitious, unbroken by the weight of eternity." The delegation began boarding the escort ship. Peter paused at the entrance and looked back at Lisa, who had chosen to remain behind. "You could still come," he said. "They would make room for you." Lisa shook her head. "My place is here. Someone has to make sure Earth keeps its promises while you're out there making new ones." Peter smiled, understanding in his eyes. He had learned a lot in 5 years, but some things he had known from the beginning. Hope was not a single moment of triumph. It was the daily work of becoming better, the endless effort to bridge the gap between what you were and what you could be. He boarded the ship, and the doors closed behind him. Lisa watched as the vessel rose slowly from the hangar, silver light streaming from its engines. It passed through the atmosphere and into the darkness beyond, becoming a single point of light among countless others. The stars had seemed so silent once. Now she knew they were full of voices, watching and waiting to see what humanity would become. She returned to Colorado that evening. The monitoring station was quiet, staffed by a new generation of listeners who had grown up knowing that the universe was vast and populated and paying attention. Danny was still there, of course, sitting at his console and tracking signals from worlds they were only beginning to understand. "Delegation launched successfully?" he asked without looking up. "They're on their way," Lisa confirmed. "Should reach Nexus Prime in about 3 weeks, their time." Danny nodded, his attention still on his screens. Then he paused, leaning forward with the same intensity Lisa remembered from that night 5 years ago. "Commander," he said slowly, "we're getting something new." Lisa walked over to his station, her heart beating faster despite 5 years of experience telling her that most signals were routine. But there was something in Danny's voice that reminded her of the night everything had changed. "What is it?" she asked. Danny pointed at his screen, where a simple message was being decoded. It came from a location they had never received signals from before. Somewhere on the far side of the galaxy. The translation appeared on the screen, brief and wonderful. "We heard your song. We would like to learn the words." Lisa stared at the message, understanding blooming slowly. The transmission that had saved humanity had not just reached the conclave. It had traveled further, spreading across the galaxy like ripples in a pond. And now species they had never contacted were reaching out, drawn by the music and the stories and the hope that humans had shared. "Send a response," Lisa said. "Tell them we would be honored to teach them." Danny began typing, a smile spreading across his face. Outside, the sun was setting over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. In a universe that had once seemed empty and indifferent, Earth was no longer alone. The delegation would reach Nexus Prime and begin the long work of proving humanity worthy of the stars. But that was only one part of the story. Here on Earth, Lisa and Danny and millions of others would continue the work that had begun with a desperate transmission and a plea for mercy. They would plant forests and raise children. They would create art and seek knowledge. They would fail and fall and rise again, as humans always had. The galaxy had targeted Earth for destruction. One human transmission had changed everything. But the true test was not in the moments of crisis. It was in the ordinary days that followed, when no one was watching, when the choice to be better was made not out of fear, but out of conviction. Lisa looked up at the first stars appearing in the darkening sky. Somewhere out there, the conclave was watching. Somewhere out there, new species were listening to the song humanity had shared with the universe. And somewhere inside every human heart, the same question waited to be answered. What would they become? The stars did not answer. They simply shone, as they always had, patient and eternal, waiting for humanity to find its own way home. The beginning had only just begun.